From this very point, we could see the new Kyoto, quite a city. It was fairly dark when we reached the guest house, and there, in the cozy lounge, we discussed our plans for the next day. Next morning, and I must say, a bright sunny morning, the first thing we did was to inspect the guest house where we were staying. A simple yet a typical British colonial structure, built in 1876, 4 years after the salt mines were taken over by the British administration and salt operations began. Now, it has been turned into a guest house for the Pakistan Mineral Development Corporation, PMDC's important guests and officers touring the area. Surrounded by green lawns and flower beds, dotted with old and young trees, and a multitude of garden birds fluttering around, the guest house was radiating a comforting atmosphere. While having tea in the lawn, I was told an interesting story as to how these salt mines were discovered some 327 years before Christ. Maryam, Sana, and Nuri, all of them knew the legend. It goes on like this. When Alexander the Great invaded India and came up to River Jihlam to fight the last and the final battle with King Porus, he was camped somewhere here. Army horses were loosened to graze around. Suddenly, some of his soldiers observed that the horses were not grazing but licking stones and rocks, and one of them picked up a rock and tasted it with his tongue. "Holy Father, that was salt." Now, salt was a precious commodity in those days, the king was informed, and Alexander the Great himself tasted a few pieces and found them to be pure salt. This is how Kyoto salt mines were discovered. The largest happens to be in Poland. I still wonder how polished salt was discovered. When we reached the mine area, the public relation manager of PMDC received us. I was astonished to see the crowds, tourists and visitors, most of them school and college girls. A mini railway train was ready to get all of us into the mine. It was like a carnival. I was told that the crowds were not an unusual sight. Kyoto salt mines are visited by hundreds of visitors every day. Anyway, I was amazed. I never thought that there would be so many people lining up to go into the salty depths of those hills. We boarded the train. We were in the last compartment. Schoolgirls and boys filled the rest. The train, electrically operated, was more than 100 years old, what we call a narrow gauge affair. In a minute, we entered the tunnel that was sparsely lighted. At places, tube lights were hanging from the roof, and we could see the tourists pasted to the tunnel walls to let pass the train. Our first stop was at a small mosque, entirely built of multicolored salt rocks. We decided to walk around guided by a professional guide deputed by the PMDC. He, after giving us an introductory lecture, took us to the various levels of the mine. There were 6 levels, and we started our walk from the underground level 2. Now, come with us and see what we found in the fabulous salt mine. No doubt, it is a wonderful place. Long and colorful corridors, saltwater lakes, bridges and large halls. Ultimately, we were taken to a working area where a group of miners were extracting salt by drilling and crushing the rocks into manageable pieces. These miners are probably descendants of the old-timers who were operating this mine for the last many centuries. Work was on in many other parts of the mine too, as we soon heard the rattle of heavy motor engines and saw a long line of trolleys carrying huge amount of salt rock. These trolleys were being pulled by heavy-duty tractors. I was told that the salt was being taken to a chemical factory nearby on the outskirts of Kyora. Suddenly, we saw something we did not expect under the bowels of the earth. A post office. It was a neat and a clean room built of salt blocks.
I want to send a letter to Scotland.
I could not resist writing a letter to my parents in London. Just guess where I am writing these lines. From a salt mine hundreds of feet down from the surface, I wrote to them.